That's hard. I didn't want to stop playing. But welcome to Dab Chat for today. Thank you for tuning in. I hope I gave enough time for everybody to join who wanted to join. And the first thing I'd like to do is share a section of an interview with Chris Cooper, who is the man, the bird watcher, 57 years old, looking at birds in Central Park, and who encouraged Amy Cooper to please put a leash on her dog. And she refused. He was going to offer her dog a treat from a collection of dog treats that he stores for just that situation of recalcitrant owners. But after she screamed at him, "Don't touch my dog," instead of doing what he hoped she would do, which most owners do when he produces a dog treat, which is leash their dog so that their dogs don't go and take the treat. She didn't leash her dog. Instead, she launched into an angry tirade, and he was able to catch her behavior on video. She's now lost her job, custody of her dog, and unfortunately, people are sending her death threats. So Chris Cooper made a very measured and reasoned statement in his interview with CNN, and I thought we could all benefit from watching it. It helps us to be compassionate and understanding and just admire this man for who he is, and admire the patience and the spirit of endurance that people have had to cultivate in various instances where racism has jeopardized their lives, and just generally living in a country where you know that racism might determine whether you live or die. Hi, Tim. Thanks for joining me. Okay, so here is the video. I'll just press play and tell me if the volume needs adjusting, but hopefully it will be good. Oh, I've just realized I'll need to skip forward on the video because first they show the...
With a white woman. Her name is Amy Cooper, no relation. The whole thing is not captured on video, but it apparently began when he asked her to put her dog on a leash as required by park rules. They went back and forth, and then Amy Cooper claimed that she was scared. He then turned on his camera. She asked him to stop and then dial 911, telling the dispatcher that an African-American man was threatening her life.
Please stop. Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to me.
I'm taking pictures calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, who has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man. I'm in Central Park. He is recording me, threatening myself and my dog. can't hear you that I'm being threatened by a man in the Bramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
Amy Cooper has apologized but was fired from her job. Joining me now is Christian Cooper. We contacted Amy Cooper, by the way, last night, and she was invited on this show. She's invited on the show at any time. This is a statement to CNN. Amy Cooper said, "I think I was just scared." She wanted to publicly apologize to everyone. "I'm not a racist. I did not mean to harm that man in any way." She also didn't mean any harm to the African-American community. Do you accept her apology?
I think her apology is sincere. I'm not sure if in that apology she recognizes that while she may not be or consider herself a racist, that particular act was definitely racist. And the fact that that was her recourse at that moment, granted it was a stressful situation, a sudden situation, maybe a moment of spectacularly poor judgment, but she went there and had this racist act that she did. So
she understood the power she wielded at that moment to call police as a white woman on a black man, as a scary black man. I'm going to call the police and say an African-American man is. She understood that part of it. She had the wherewithal to understand that.
Exactly. She was looking for some way to get an edge in the situation, and that's where she went, and that ultimately did not help her. So, is she a racist? I can't answer that. Only she can answer that, and I would submit probably the only way she's going to answer that is going forward with, how she conducts herself and how she chooses to reflect on the situation and examine it.
Well, isn't that lovely? Whew. So that was Amy Cooper's victim, or the man she attempted to victimize, Chris Cooper. No relation, but his measured response, he's so intelligent and thoughtful, and is a very good example of leadership, of how to think about people whose racism may not be something they consciously acknowledge, even when they've behaved in a very obviously racist way, saying, "I'm going to call the police and tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life." So she announces what she's going to do on video. That was a lizard brain level of rage and entitlement that you can also see in some comments on the internet that defend Amy, that say, yes, leashing dogs, why is that a problem to have dogs be unleashed? And then you have other comments that say, nope, they've seen dogs be injured by cars, run into traffic after being taken into Central Park and taken off a leash. People were recounting their stories on the New York Times of being bitten by dogs and just having very entitled and surprised dog owners saying, "Oh, but my dog's so nice." And I can't imagine that I could have never imagined they would do something like this, bite a stranger. Dogs need to be on leashes, particularly in a nature reserve, which apparently that area of Central Park, known as the Ramble, was. But death threats are that part of the bell curve that have to be denounced in order to try and dissuade them from being that way. Don't threaten people with death. It's not a good idea. Cycles of vengeance and escalation are not really the way to affect broad social change. Now, you might be familiar with the phrase incremental social change. It's what a lot of people have advised. I think Karl Popper invented that term, and people look at examples like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, where idealists shouting phrases who wanted to bring about a change of dynamics did so in such a violent way that begat further violence. So nobody is really, or critical masses of people are not usually attracted to people who sound too revolutionary. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to passively sit back and say, let's never change anything about society, because to do so would be to instigate a revolution, and that's inherently violent and flawed. It's possible to change society. It doesn't even have to be baby steps. It can be significant steps. but it has to be done invitingly as well as assertively. So both. I read a little bit about a man called Charlemagne the God, Charlemagne the God, who is an African-American DJ who recently interviewed Joe Biden on a show called The Breakfast Show or something. And Joe Biden had said, if you can't tell the difference between me and Donald Trump, you're not black. You ain't black, he said. And that caused a significant degree of backlash. Even some strong supporters of his amongst the black community said they were offended by that. And it took him a few hours, but he apologized for being so cavalier and making a joke, making a statement that sounded like he took the support of African Americans for granted. So I can understand where he was impulsively coming from if he felt under attack, to say the gulf between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is so significant, particularly in this moment where it would appear that Trump's negligence is disproportionately targeting African Americans, as if Trump's determination to not do anything to help the people of America is in part fueled by his conviction that people won't care because they will share his understanding that if a disproportionate number of African Americans are affected, then people won't mind some white deaths alongside of that because they'll just accept that as collateral damage. But that this is essentially the resources of the state should not be devoted to helping African Americans and to helping American society combat a pandemic that is disproportionately affecting Black American women who work in essential services, Black African American men and women, I should say, but it's often African American women in the cleaning services, in those low-paid jobs such as checkout, cashier person as well, that are exposed to the public, to lots of members of the public on a regular basis and aren't necessarily getting hazard pay, aren't necessarily getting adequate levels of protective gear, etc., and who are disproportionately dying and who are disproportionately being underserved by the American healthcare system, which could have been more. The Affordable Care Act could have served even more Americans. But what a lot of Democratic voters forget is that Obama was contending with a significant lack of support in Congress, because Democrats have a tendency to be ideological, to be aspirational in terms of their values, to want justice, but that often lends itself to enthusiasm in spurts. So you vote in a president and you go, job done. We've got the president that we need. Everything's going to be great now. And they forget that you also do have to turn up for midterm elections to vote in Democratic politicians to Congress. Otherwise, you don't have people writing the legislation to support the intentions of the president. And a lot of Democrats, having had their enthusiasm in 2008 or 2012, failed President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, failed to support them in midterm elections. Democratic vote turnout dropped enough to have a wave of Republicans taking office in Congress, and then a wave of obstreperous, obstructive Republican politicians trying to thwart every action that Obama was taking, even those that would obviously help Americans and give more Americans access to healthcare, even broaden the private healthcare sector, so increase in industry. Republicans are supposed to be in favor of increasing industry. But yes, so Democrats, don't forget that it was a fall off in Democratic voter enthusiasm that led to a lack of ability to expand the Affordable Care Act, to bring more Americans into the fold of an American version of universal health care. It could have been expanded to become more universal, but that presidency, that Democratic president, lacked a majority in the House and the Senate after a while. So the comments have all dried up, but I guess that's because relatively fewer people are watching today. Maybe people are busy, maybe it's a bad time, maybe I didn't use an interesting enough hashtag. That's okay. Regular viewers know that I'm here trying to be consistent at a same-ish time of night for me, time of day for you. Lots of Open America tweets have been traced back to bots. Very true. We've talked about it, and we were watching some footage yesterday of someone discussing the pattern of Russian or just hostile actor interference, or rather attacks on not only the American political system, but just Americans generally. So fake accounts infiltrating mothers' groups to share confected stories of adverse events from vaccinations, to pretend that their children had suffered terribly after being vaccinated, and to just build on the pre-existing tendency that some people have to fall prey to a naturalistic fallacy and assume that vaccinations are man-made or human-made and are therefore bad, and that everything else, breast milk, getting measles, is good. Bob's here. Hi, Bob. Thanks for joining. It is nice to see a familiar face. I think there's you and Limbovan and Tim, and possibly some quiet others. So yes, let's look at some other things on Twitter, because there has been still a lot of news. And people are doing some interesting analyses of Sweden and what's happening in Sweden. They had a partial lockdown. They had lockdown measures, but they weren't compulsory. All right, so yes, we watched Christian Cooper be very dignified and thoughtful and inspiring. Dr. Fauci has come out and said, let me just check what you can see. Yes, you can see what I can see. Dr. Fauci has said, yes, clearly the scientific data is really quite evident now about the lack of efficacy for it. Yes, not only a lack of efficacy, but also a significant increase in the risk of death and a very significant increase in the risk of heart arrhythmias developing if you have hydroxychloroquine, or even worse, if you have that combination promoted by the president of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Wow. So you've been resolute with that, never introduced your family to your unvaccinated brother's family. 8 people, 8 children or 6 children and 2 adults. Yeah, it's hard when you can't say that's a dispute over politics. Those are health decisions. And they've clearly been adamant about pursuing a non-vaccinated lifestyle, even though it's caused division in your family. Interesting. So yes, Trump will probably be a bit mad about hydroxychloroquine being rejected by Dr. Fauci, but at the same time, maybe he'll embrace it. I've argued many times that he supports hydroxychloroquine in order to enhance division, in order to fuel the rage of his loyal base, who like the energy of being angry with other people and being angry with Democrats and having their worldviews validated, that Democrats are just out to get them and just automatically dismiss everything the president promotes, even if it's a miracle drug that's so great, like hydroxychloroquine. Take it. What have you got to lose, crazy people? So Trump's talking about insulin now. I wonder what he's saying about insulin. Are you talking about something above and beyond what he said about how maybe he should take it? Perhaps he's seeking to address the fact that it has doubled in cost. All right, now this is very critical. Most of America, 74%, is pro-mask, according to a new Navigator poll. Now, this might be one of those questions where people are a little bit tempted to conceal their true opinions from pollsters. But at the same time, if you are strongly enough anti-mask, presumably you'd feel at least some compulsion to tell the truth to a surveyor. All right, so let's have a look. Big screen. The question asked of poll respondents was, there are differing opinions on whether or not people should be wearing masks right now when they are in public. But if you had to choose, would you say that you are generally pro-mask or anti-mask? 8% aren't sure, 18% overall were anti-mask, and Democrats 91% in favor of masks, and even Republicans 56%, and that's quite close to independents 62%. I think that shows that a lot of people who call themselves independents in America are essentially Republicans who aren't ready to admit it. But in the current political context, people who aren't willing to admit that they're Republicans are also people who might very well vote against the president out of horror at his not only ineptitude but malfeasance in office. So that's 33% of Republicans that are anti-mask and 11% not sure. Interesting. You just got the face shields. Awesome. I've been practicing for how long I can wear one for. I'm modeling it as a... Let's see if I can do a good job with this. Gotta fix the hair. Face shields also prevent expulsion of viral particles straight out into a shared airspace. So I'm at home. I won't try and wear it for too long. Oh, whoops, I haven't taken off the protective coating. Well, I haven't worn it out yet. Is that going to make a difference? It's good anyway. I'm a bit asthmatic, so it's handy for me because I'll be able to breathe a little bit better than I would in a mask, but it's still going to be protective in the way that shared mask usage is protective, or high compliance with requests to wear masks is protective. You used a lot in construction, a face mask to not inhale dust. Sensible. All right. So it's good that there is such broad support for mask wearing amongst the American public. There's probably a bit of a conscientiousness bias because the type of people who respond to a phone call from pollsters are more likely to be conscientious than other people. So that's got a selection bias that skews towards the type of people who listen to instructions and who listen to science and experts. Conscientious people. Do you know conscientiousness is a character attribute that is highly correlated with long life because it's correlated with less risk-taking. If you're conscientious, you're more likely to floss your teeth and therefore have less bacteria make its way into your bloodstream and start to collect plaque in your arteries. You're more likely to, I guess, watch your weight and take exercise and not take on stress that's associated with breaking the law and things like that. So it's a good character attribute to cultivate. Yes, the advantage of you're talking about goggles for construction, Bob, or are you talking about using an actual face shield like that? I'm excited because I think it will help my 5-year-old comply with having to wear either a mask or a shield in the classroom setting. All right, let's make this a little bit bigger. Face shield, okay. Okay, so when the media gives a great deal of exposure to the protests, the anti-mask protests, the anti-shutdown protests, which are weird because wearing masks would help shutdowns end sooner if you had some protective behaviors in place. But at the same time, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that people who are protesting both shutdowns and the one public health measure that could help make the shutdowns end sooner, that is to say, broad levels of mask uptake and use, because they're anti-helping America and they're being paid to promote policies that are anti-public health in America. Anti-shutdowns to save people and anti-mask wearings to save people, almost as if the Republican Party is happy to benefit from chaos. Now, to see why that might be, let's have a look at how much they benefit from chaos and lack of oversight. An article was published on the federal government's support disproportionately flows to large corporations with access to credit markets. So yes, people have been afraid that small businesses aren't getting the loans that they need. What's the article's name? Okay. Is it easy to read what I have up on the screen, or do you prefer if I just describe to you what I see? Oh, so they make face shields for kids that look like astronauts' helmet. Nice. I haven't seen any of those yet. So this journalist wanted to quantify just how much. They're an executive editor of The Prospect. Seems good. How much they wanted to quantify how much the Federal Reserve's corporate bailout announcements, so not actually spending any money, but just making announcements, have been worth to the investor class. Turns out it's trillions of dollars. So just the Federal Reserve announcing that it will bail out corporations has helped the stock market flourish. So how much did they announce? They announced that they would spend $4.5 trillion in future spending to support securities markets, and that was enough to keep owners of capital protected from falls in the stock market. It's almost like the Federal Reserve wants to help Trump keep his claim of having a high stock market. Almost as if Trump perhaps exerts an unhealthy influence over the Federal Reserve. Since the Fed announced March 23rd that it would purchase corporate bonds, the 3 biggest weeks in the history of corporate bond sales have happened. Dozens of companies that couldn't otherwise borrow at such low rates got in on it. Yikes. Funds that track the corporate bond market all resemble a panoramic view of the Grand Canyon, hitting a low point on March 23rd before shooting back up again. Bond spreads, well, these are all terms I don't know. Bond spreads, the cost of borrowing, have shrunk, even in the risky junk bond market, as investors rush in, confident of a Fed guarantee. So all your the Federal Reserve is printing money to help the stock market stay afloat, or printing the promise of money. They've promised $4.5 trillion. How did I miss that happening? Wow. March the 23rd, $4.5 trillion promised to engage in corporate stock bonds. And these are junk bonds, very risky bonds. What a great time for investors to be supported in making risky investments, because the economy is surely going to do great guns, because that whole virus thing and consumers' feeling of unsafeness and unwillingness to venture from their home, that 16% drop in consumer purchasing over the last few months, that's all going to clear up any minute now, because America's cases are declining. Or wait, they're not declining, they're plateauing, and they're increasing in many states. So the Fed support disproportionately flows to large corporations with access to credit markets. Small and mid-sized businesses with much more need are more likely to struggle. That's very short-sighted, isn't it? Because we know what happens when vulture capitalists are overly in charge of the levers of power, of government power. They give out money to their friends and their class, the investor class, and they neglect small businesses and consumers and wage earners. And they then stand back and go, whoops, as small businesses all go out of business at a similar time, which crashes consumer confidence still further, which further contracts purchases, which further contracts consumer confidence, which leads to more people being unwilling to spend money, more people interested in saving money because their economic future is so uncertain, which leads to more businesses closing and more job losses. And that self-defeating spiral of economic depression has been unleashed by Republicans before a number of times, but they don't learn because they're so governed by instinct to distribute public money to their friends and donors. And it's a very self-serving approach to politics that we should remember, that there are differences between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And if you turn the government over to Republicans for too long, they will give all your money away to their friends and crash the economy. If you ever become too deferential to corporations, if you ever fall prey to media bias that seems to say None of us would have a job were it not for these beneficent billionaires. Thank you for employing us, Elon Musk and Starbucks owners. That is the only type of jobs that have any worth to them. And just minimize the significance of small businesses, small family-run businesses, or just smaller enterprises, that without them, a lot of employment collapses. And without a lot of that employment, you have far less consumer spending. And if all those small businesses collapse, you have a crisis on your hands. And it will be difficult for those big corporations that have just had their value inflated because the federal government has guaranteed to buy their corporate bonds. Far fewer people will be buying your products, big corporations, when there is a 10-year sustained depression, because the people in charge are too goddamn stubborn and stupid to remember who buys things and where they get that money from. And that it's not just being employed by a corporation, and you can't just go, oh, whatever. If there's a lot of unemployment, then that'll depress unions, and it'll mean that they'll just be desperate for any jobs under any conditions, and our labor costs will fall further. Yep, you might be trying to create a serf lord environment, but you'll also create a lot of very hungry and very hungry people, but also a lot of people adjacent to the hungry people who don't want to become hungry and who don't want to spend their money anymore, who want to save their money. Yes, human capital stock is what one of Trump's economic advisors said yesterday. You've cut back on purchasing, Bob, and so have many other people. Yes, Arkansas has had a large spike in COVID. We'll come to that, I think, next. That's the next thing we're going to look at. No. Okay, well, soon we are. Let's have a small listen to this doctor from Michigan.
So I do worry that by downplaying the threat from the virus early on and continuing to push contradiction.
Oops.
Rather, is leading people to not take this risk as seriously as they should. On April 18th, he stated that America's testing capability and capacity is fully sufficient to begin opening up the country. And that is definitely not true. For a pandemic that has no treatment, no vaccine, and can spread extremely easily, the only way to contain it is the good old public health procedures of finding the case, isolating the contacts, so that the disease cannot spread any further. And we don't have in Michigan quite the testing capability that we need to so safely open up the country. Yet Trump is pushing us to do so, and our Michigan Republican legislators continue to demand the same. So as a doctor and now a senior, I'm concerned about this unsafe approach will mean for our vulnerable Michiganders.
Okay, that was a very important video. Oh, I didn't make it large enough, but that's okay. It was mostly sound. I'm good, Euromaestro. Thanks for asking. I was just hoping to highlight on this graphic because I've seen it before. It's important to talk about. It's sourced from the CDC. It's a graphic of a single asymptomatic carrier in a restaurant. So the carrier is seated there, and the air conditioning unit is over here at the right. Oh, you probably can't see my mouse. Can you see a little white arrow moving around the screen? Probably not. Andy, I think that's worth muting you right now. Don't threaten us. Lordy. Yes, so I hope you're well, Euromaestro. I enjoyed looking at your account. So yes, that's the air conditioning blew that way. Asymptomatic carrier is there, and you get the neighboring people at the table there, and people at the table here who become infected with COVID-19. Yes, the antibodies tests are only 50% accurate, which makes it all the more unconscionable. They've known that for a little while. All the more unconscionable, I think, or at least they knew that there was less accuracy with the antibody tests than the PCR tests for live virus. So it was very unconscionable of the CDC on their website to lump in antibody test results together with live virus test results, as if to say they were the same thing, or they just all counted as tests, because the antibody tests are less accurate and they're not identifying people who are currently infected with the disease. They're including people who have had the disease then, in lumping them in with the cases, which makes the fatality rate look lower and makes it look as if, oh, well, lots of people have already had it, don't worry, when the case numbers might be lower. Yes, they measure different things. So there, that restaurant, important study. And then the next one is this outbreak in a call center in Seoul. And if you can see, there was one infected person here. So this is the layout of an office. And all these people sitting around are infected. There's other people here and there's other people here, but they don't get that. There's not as widespread infection there, which indicates that perhaps there was a lower role of infected surfaces like common bathroom areas, but that a real key source of viral transmission was just being near to the air breathed out by an infected person. So this side of the office was relatively spared in terms of people contracting the infection, and up the top you have lots of blue infections. Yeah, Andy, it's time to go. We work with real information. What did you learn from the restaurant study, Euromaestro? Yes, in Michigan, the testing capacity or the testing capability is not quite there to be able to safely open up the country. So it's as if because of pressure from Republicans, America it's like crossing lanes without indicating. Okay, everybody, let's just change across 4 lanes. Good luck, everyone. We're just going to plunge into doing this and act as if there's no means of safeguarding people's jobs or safeguarding the economy other than just going back to work and risking the lives of people on the front line of human interactions, people who can't work from home. When in actuality, in a wealthy nation where you do have a lot of successful corporations and it is possible to use taxpayer money, it is possible to trade off the fact that America is still a highly desirable investment destination, to take advantage of very low international investment rates at present. I mean, international interest rates, that's important. Yes, so it's really important to take time out to at least reflect on the way Republicans are dragging America into danger. So Euromeister is saying you've uploaded some new studies for me today. That's exciting. So you're saying I should visit your Twitter account to see these charts that you've uploaded. Is it on Twitter? Oh, look, Donald Trump is whinging about Twitter because they fact-checked his false assertions about mail-in voting, and he pretended that it's not safe, even though he himself not only votes via mail-in ballot, but also his campaign has been sending solicitation letters to voters in Pennsylvania saying, make sure you can vote safely and register to vote by mail. So the hypocrisy and just the lethal level of deceit is quite something to encourage us all to build a coalition of decency, to reach out to other people who might show a spark of decency and say, these are some facts you should know. They may be underemphasized by the media. Let me emphasize that for you, that in order to save lives, if you've been feeling any concern about the way the president won't wear a mask because he thinks it doesn't look good, he wants to project strength, but at the moment we need to project unity of adopting pragmatic measures to keep Americans safe. All right, Euromaestro, I'm trying to visit your Twitter account to see what graphs you've uploaded lately. I did see Dr. Eric retweeted you. All right, let's have a look. I'll remove this and we will add all right, Sweden, Brazil, and the US have the largest rises in active cases. So this is a graph from the yellow background. I'm taking it from the Financial Times because they publish some good data, and their source is the Johns Hopkins University. And here you have Sweden, still high. Cases per million, 7-day rolling average. So there's close to 50 cases per million in Sweden still. The USA coming in second, about 22 active cases, new active cases per million a day. Is that? Because it's change in active cases. Oh yeah, 21.5, Spain, 15.5. Why is Spain going up so much? Because they ended their lockdowns. Iran seems fairly stable. Canada 6.0. Belgium's so high. What's Belgium doing? France 1.4, Germany. Why is Germany 4.1, but then that's, or maybe it's negative 4.1. Nope, I am not entirely understanding that graph. Oh, it's your chart. Ah, good job. Yes, the Financial Times has been doing an excellent job. Also, they don't do active cases. Okay. Well, thank you for taking, oh, the parentheses is negative numbers. Okay. I'm glad I've got the actual author of the chart. Okay, so that's why France 1.4 is negative 1.4. Yes, I should have realized because it was lower than China, which is at no new cases per million. How awesome. I know they detected 180 asymptomatic cases, but that was by testing how many million people? Conducting a lot of tests. So yes, negative numbers mean decline, which is good. It's good to be in that situation, isn't it? All right. Brazil, the USA, and Sweden have the most new cases per capita. But yes, I've heard that South America is becoming increasingly a place of concern. Look at Brazil. Brazil's so high. This is days since the country's first reached 100 cases. So it's been prevalent in the USA for longer than in Brazil. South Korea and the USA had their first confirmed case at the same time, didn't they? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That was good to look at. You've lost the audio connection, but I think other people can still hear me. Yes, Bolsonaro is definitely tropical Trump, isn't he? So we've covered that a high proportion of polled Americans are in favor of mask wearing, 75%. And look, the people of Georgia apparently have been smarter than their governor, which would explain why Brian Kemp has quite low poll ratings, I think the lowest of all American governors in all states. But this is a graph of open table reservations. So even though the lockdown was lifted and the numbers have started to climb, they've been very slow. So look, here's Georgia in orange, Texas in gray, and Florida in blue. So they're all starting to rise. I wonder what that dip is Maybe that dip was in response to some bad news, but it's had a dip and is going up again. So that's people being sensible and not rushing straight out back to restaurants in the same level that they were prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. Okay. Yes, on April the 18th, Jared Yates Sexton made the prescient remark, but he's pretty on the money, that the next few weeks are going to be one push after another, probably more of these manufactured protests funded and pushed by big moneyed interests. We're going to be swimming in the propaganda and illusions by the end of this thing, and it won't matter how many die. Well, it certainly does seem a bit like that, doesn't it? That 100,000 deaths haven't made that much of an emotional impact on Trump supporters. But there are other people. There are other people in the world other than Trump supporters. There are independents, and they are predominantly who matters in this situation. If there is to be any hope of a free and fair election, it is to be hoped that independent voters have seen the light. And older voters have certainly turned against Trump in a collective sense, which is great. So what I might do, we'll just quickly have a look at what Adam Schiff says, because he's right. Restricting mail-in voting during a pandemic is dangerous enough. But Trump's statements highlight another threat. He's laying the groundwork to delegitimize millions of votes this fall and cast doubt on the result. This is what tin pot dictators do, not the US. So I would say that's a concerning statement from a respected Democratic congressman, highlighting to us that, yes, Trump resembles a tin pot dictator, and he pushed the same case in 2016, that if he lost, it would be because everything was rigged against him. And Michael Cohen, his own personal attorney, testified to Congress that Trump didn't expect to win, that what he actually hoped would happen would be that what he expected to happen would be that he would lose and have a television show of his own, Trump TV channel on cable or something, and that he thought his campaign for presidency was effectively one big infomercial in which he got to promote himself, disparage his political opponent, and build up support, build up a supply of people to give him money and buy his products and pay for access to him. But he also seems to enjoy a lot of the different parts of being president. He enjoys the Hollywood level of celebrity, getting to make speeches, play to a crowd, particularly at his rallies, where he can say anything and get a laugh. When he appears before a world audience, and his comment that got a laugh was, "This administration has achieved more than any other United States administration in history." And the assembled diplomats just laughed at him, and he sort of went, "Oh, that's not the reaction I was expecting," which was more gracious than I would generally expect of him. But he knows, don't show your temper in public if you can help it. He usually is in a position of most showing his temper when strong, persistent female journalists question him in a live setting, so a Rose Garden hearing, and then he can't shrug off criticism as easily. It can't say, "Oh, you're laughing. That's not the response I was expecting." Ha ha ha. Yes, we've achieved a lot, and I say that, and you find that laughable. But I'll just complain later while I watch cable TV, and at least rejoice that Fox News will definitely not be covering that moment. We need to see in 2 weeks the effect on the numbers from reopening, yes. And as people are saying, Arkansas is seeing a spike. And Brian Kemp, I think this was your reference to Brian Kemp, not only did he want to open early, he started with nail salons, tattoo parlors, and bowling alleys. And then it seemed a bit unpopular as well, and Trump threw him under the bus, essentially by saying that he didn't think Brian Kemp was doing the right thing. Is that a typo? I'm not entirely sure what that remark means. You have leave to explain it if you want to explain it further. All right, let's expand this and have a look at some more information. According to the best performing model, daily deaths will be higher at the end of the summer than they are today. So going into the fall, not even in the middle of the fall, but going into the fall at the end of this summer. So summer's starting, here we are in May. So that's, the number is down here, and the projection is it's going to keep going up and down on this jaggedy thing, but that the number will be higher than today. And the highest range is up quite high there, and the lowest estimate is down there. But the lowest estimate of the model is if people maintain extreme social distancing measures, which they won't do. Polling shows 61% of the American public hold the president responsible for the high numbers. That's very sensible of them. I'm very excited. Let's have a look. And another good development is that Americans are finally starting to hold the president responsible for his handling of the economy, which is not just terrible now, but was terrible in the lead up to it. And if people are dropping some of their former convictions that the president was just this magical economic manager, if they're starting to drop some of those convictions, they may be more willing to revisit the past and say, well, perhaps that tariff war wasn't such a great idea as well. And that will make them more receptive to journalists who talk about the fact that there was a manufacturing recession in 2019 that was reported on in a fringe way in the print media, but was not reported on broadly at cap saturation levels in cable news or anything like that, so that people could still blissfully remain unaware of the president's wholesale mismanagement of the US economy. So Euromeister is saying that the change in direction to 61% thinking that the president's responsible for the high numbers is up from 50% a couple of weeks earlier. Well, how interesting. So his tantrums about how Joe Scarborough is potentially a murderer from 20 years ago, when Joe was in Washington and his intern had an undiagnosed atrial valve weakness and fainted at her desk and hit her head on her desk and died. That hasn't been a successful ploy for Trump getting his independent supporters or some of his Republican supporters to dismiss what Joe Scarborough has been saying. I've seen Joe Scarborough speak straight to camera and say, it's not going to fly, President, your disinformation campaign. People are going to go to their doctors and their doctors are going to say, don't take hydroxychloroquine. No, it's not a mineral drug. I don't care if the president claims to be taking it. It's not sensible. Don't do it. He is being reckless with people's health, and he's being reckless with your health. So Trump can't intimidate Joe out of giving that kind of feedback. And I say Joe very informally, but I do watch Joe Scarborough. He's not very progressive. He's a former Republican. But because Democrats already know Trump is bad, I don't have to preach to the converted. If I want to help Americans build a critical mass of opposition to a tyrannical and corrupt President Trump, then I have to help chip away at the margins of the wavering, the people who are thinking, it doesn't seem that great to have 40 million newly unemployed Americans. It doesn't seem that great to have a president who delivers multiple contradictory statements, who champions untested medicines, and then when they are tested and proven to be lacking in both safety and efficacy, still continue to insist that they are a great drug, even as they are now known to put Americans' lives in danger. So the president actively trying to get people killed on a daily basis is, would you believe it or not, helping to break the spell that Trump has exercised over so many people's imaginations. And it's a spell that was created in large part by reality television. The fact that Trump had a script writer or multiple script writers who wrote lines for him that made him seem like a responsible businessman, who considered various elements to problems, who understood human dynamics, who understood human psychology. And instead, Trump is just an intuitive con artist who understands how to flatter some people, how to tell people with any grievance or entitlement or frustration that he's heard their problems and he thinks they're the greatest, and that everybody else has been treating them terribly, and that he, Trump, will treat them beautifully, the best ever. So yes, independents are the group of voters that are going to see the most movement here, because Democrats already know, they've been open to the idea for a while, that Trump is not the magical economic whiz that he claimed to be on television, that he's not the magical economic whiz kid that he claimed to be in his election campaign, that he is in fact a terrible incompetent as well as being racist. But Democrats are more likely to say he's racist, and independents are more likely to dismiss whether or not he's racist and say, what is he doing for us economically? And if they're starting to realize that all of Trump's excuses sound blustery and unconvincing, if they're starting to realize that their lives are in danger as a consequence of Trump's racism, Trump's dismissal of the pandemic because he doesn't think it affects people that are important to him, or he doesn't care provided there's enough chaos and terror across the country for him to keep telling lies to people and be unchallenged by them. If he can accuse his critics of murder, perhaps that helps some people wake up to the fact that not all of Trump's criticisms of the media are fair. So don't spend your time, as it is tempting to do, looking at some of the most solid pro-Trump people on Twitter. It is almost like looking away from a car wreck. It's hard to drag your eyes away from something so extraordinary and unrelatable. We want to see, is there anything that we can relate to you Trump supporter? And then we look at them and we go, no. But remember, we don't need to focus on those extremes. Extremes live on Twitter. Twitter is a home for political extremism. It's a bell curve where the furthest part of the left live in large numbers and the furthest extremes of the right live in large numbers. You have a disengaged middle who's not on Twitter. Maybe they're on Facebook, and yes, Facebook is a hot spot for disinformation. But there are enough adults out there who have at least a bit of an ear to the ground and who may increasingly know somebody who has become sick or who has died. It's nearly doubled amongst Republicans. That's such fantastic news. I've been trying to sort of spout this. Navigator research, April the 22nd. I'll show you what I've been saying since April. Nope. I realize I should have used a bookmark because this is my favorite article to reference. Published by Navigator Research, which are a Democratic leaning group. Okay. Oh, well, I can scroll down to April 22nd fairly easily. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I'm going to share this with you. And then we'll go to some new information. But I just want to highlight what I think fuels the change, which is those who know someone sick are less likely to approve of Trump. So that's my key takeaway for my audience. And I've made that comment over and over again, that if you need comfort, even as cases increase and even as you know your fellow citizens are suffering, know that for everyone who knows someone who's sick, what happens to them if they're an independent, that they drop 15 points in approval for Donald Trump. So at that point on April the 22nd, it was still fairly small. If Republicans know someone infected, then the 84% of them were likely to approve of Trump, compared to 89%. Okay. Close. All right. So now let's go to some newer data from Navigator Research. So is that where you are getting your data from right now, European Maestro? We will go find some more. I am proud of Republicans for changing their mind. But look at this. 78% rate the US economy negatively. Hallelujah, they're registered that. And 50% disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, a reversal from March when over half reported approving of Trump's economic performance. Is that a reversal? I don't know entirely, but I'm still pleased. It is key. Let's have a look at this. Democrats must puncture the last big Trump myth. This really is critical to making it so evident that the country is not supporting Donald Trump. We must make it really such a big difference between Biden and Trump. And that is by helping people understand that he has put the economy at risk, that his actions, his failure to address this ongoing crisis, the fact that Americans pay federal tax, but they can't expect a proportionate level of federal response to this national problem. Instead, you have a president who repeatedly downplays the problem, who started off downplaying it, momentarily acknowledged its severity, and has returned to downplaying it again and insisting that he is responsible for reinvigorating the American economy, and that everybody should thank him for forcing or pressuring state governors to reopen their economy, to force particularly essential workers back into their positions, and also removing unemployment insurance from lots of people who would have pretty valid concerns about returning to work in an environment where cases are on the rise. Oh, let's listen to Joe Biden a tiny bit. He says that presidents are supposed to lead, not engage in folly and be falsely masculine. And this is great that Joe Biden has picked up on a popular article. Oops, I've got to make sure it's share audio. Share audio. Because Trump sells himself to, particularly to his base of white collar and blue collar men with white men, whether they be white collar or blue collar, men without college degrees. So I guess that's primarily blue collar people, but it should also be recognized that more white collar people support Donald Trump than people typically recognize. There's a strong mythology that Trump supporters are all poor and uneducated. A lot of them are wealthy and selfish. And he still used to have at least a fairly high degree of support from college-educated white men and women, more so men than women. There's often been a gender gap, but it's been particularly pronounced since Trump officials were ordered to take children away from migrant women and migrant fathers, to take children away and imprison them, which people didn't really like that. People didn't really respond well to audio footage of children sobbing for their parents in being told, listen to the orchestra, by guards who were mocking them. We don't know the death rates, but we know in 2018, I think at least 7 children died in a way that was made known or made public, but we don't know about child death subsequent to that. We only know that lawyers representing the Trump's Department of Justice argued with a straight face in court that children didn't need access to toothbrushes or soap or blankets or conditions conducive to sleep, that those were extras that they didn't need. All right. So it was the Gallup poll. You're saying that half of Republicans say the death rate is exaggerated, whilst only 5% of Democrats agree. Oh, you're lucky that nobody's been laid off. That is lucky. All right, let's listen to hopefully the next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
Mask projects strength or weakness?
Leadership. What it presents and projects is leadership. Presidents are supposed to lead, not engage in folly and be falsely masculine. It reminds me of the guys that I grew up with playing ball. They'd walk around with a ball in their hand, but they didn't like to hit very much.
Some prominent Democratic economists, I'm sure you've heard about this, they're saying that there's a real possibility that the economy could surge right before the election. And the president could use that as a talking point for his reelection. How do you deal with that?
Surge is relative. So if you're losing tens of millions of jobs, and we're well over 30, millions and millions of jobs, and you gain back a quarter of that or half of that, it's going to look like there's real growth. But you're still going to end up, as all the economists say, with an incredibly high unemployment rate and a lot of people in real trouble.
I think wearing a mask projects.
Okay. So yes, it will probably be difficult for Trump to try and pretend that an increase in employment is a surge that he should be given credit for, given that 40 million have lost their jobs already. And making some of that back is a positive trajectory, but in a big picture sense, there will be so much hardship in the United States. Corporations have really used the opportunity to downsize, and the federal government has also really failed to deliver aid to an adequate number of small businesses. I'm not saying all small businesses haven't received financial help, but particularly African-American owned businesses, as well as just other businesses, haven't received help. When they go under, it will pull so many American communities in a downwards direction. So I think that's all from me for this evening. I've been chatting for an hour. I'll play a little bit more of my brother's music as a sign-off. And I hope you like it. He's a talented pianist and composer. All right. Yes, thank you. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for engaging with these topics and thinking about how we can best convince men. Or let's just continue convincing the women, and that will be enough to deliver a decisive electoral defeat for Trump, provided Republicans are unsuccessful in their efforts to suppress the vote. I'm going to look at one more thing. This is the Navigator Research Twitter page. So they typically have updates that seem a little cheery because, generally speaking, people are not as bad as Trump. So nearly 3 in 5 Americans, 59%, continue to say that they're more concerned that social distancing will end too soon and prolong the pandemic than go on too long and hurt the economy. So the people fearing that social distancing will go on too long, that's the red line. And people that fear social distancing will end too soon is the blue line here. It reaches 59 here, and its highest has been 54. So it's been vacillating between 53 with a high of 60, 65. and fear of social distancing going on too long has vacillated between 33 and 25. Okay, just to say though that there's still concerns. Republicans are shifting towards reopening. I'm in favor of reopening in a measured way, an extremely measured way, so not forcing essential workers back to work if their industries are not prepared, if they don't have strong social distancing measures in place, if there's not broad community adoption of safety measures such as masks. I'd be particularly in favor of open spaces, opening up for people to take exercise. And if you could have outdoor eating areas that have spaced seating, etc., it would be okay. If it was outside, there's much less risk of contracting the disease outside. If you maintain a safe distance and you have some type of barrier to viral particles giving you an infectious dose, like this, or a mask. What's the sound quality like if my sound waves are circulating in my mask rather than directly going to the microphone? What's it like in terms of audibility? I'm just curious. Okay, Trump's pandemic disapproval rating at 55, according to this particular survey. So the peak has been 56 so far. So 55 still high, and approving is at 41, and the lowest has been 40. Okay, that's a 14-point gap. It's like a little Christmas tree on its side. And Trump's credibility is taking heat. Oh, good. Americans are not on board with his claims of using hydroxychloroquine. A majority disapprove of his decision to announce he's taking hydroxychloroquine, and less than half of the public actually believes he's even taking the drug. That's awesome. Good for you, America. Okay, audio's a little bit muffled. I modeled it. I'm being a face shield model. Main Street has been hurting for a while, yes. I do take call-ins. I welcome call-ins. If you're happy to show your face on camera, I can share a whole screen with you. And that's when I'm using StreamYard. But if I used my iPad instead, I could take just an audio call-in. Perry Pilot told you that as well. So we know. But look at that, hydroxychloroquine, when Trump really puts a stake in the ground in that way and he makes a very definitive pronouncement on something, it might work for him when the evidence hasn't come out yet. And people can go, okay, yep, there's this possibility that you're right. And aren't we lucky to have a president who's just willing to order millions of doses of hydroxychloroquine on his gut response because he's so good with his gut responses. But once data actually comes out, those Americans who do have any degree of respect for research and who do have any respect for their doctors who by nature of their profession are very likely to respect research, although no guarantees. There are Trump supporting doctors who are prepared to overlook those results and say perhaps hydrochloroquine has merit. I'm sure you can find some of them. But look, okay, so overall, do you believe Trump is taking hydroxychloroquine or do you not believe him? Okay, so 47% believe he is, but 31% are adamant that he's not, and 22% say they don't even know. So this is, the president's made a statement. Is it true? Half say true. 33% say nope, he can't be trusted even to be truthful about what medication he's taking when he's effectively then recommending that medication as a prophylactic measure, as a preventative measure to avoid getting this pandemic that most people are scared of, and thus putting everybody's health at risk. Anybody who listens to him, all his loyal followers are more at risk because of Trump's announcement that he's taking hydroxychloroquine. So do we approve of that decision? Only 53% of Republicans approve of Trump's decision to announce that he's taking hydroxychloroquine. Why doesn't that equal 100? There's 53% of Republicans approve, 8% not sure, and 24% disapprove. That does not add up to 100. I guess some people didn't respond. With independents, 52% of them disapproved, just open and telling the surveyors that they just don't approve of that. So that's big. And then, of course, 76% of Democrats say, yeah, that's not great, Trump. Those percentages are only going to increase, aren't they? Because more and more evidence comes out and more studies drop hydroxychloroquine as even a treatment arm, because you can't in good conscience recruit patients for a drug that in a longitudinal study of 96,000 people, 96,000 patients with COVID-19, showed a 45% increase in the risk of death if you were given both hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. A 411% increase in the risk of cardiac arrhythmia, developing cardiac arrhythmia. I'm most concerned that Trump is promoting an unproven drug rather than lying about it, or leading to shortages of the drug for those that really need it. Though it is a problem for people who have lupus and rheumatoid arthritis that there are shortages now of hydroxychloroquine for people who have been legitimately prescribed it. And the most common adjective the public uses to describe Trump taking hydroxychloroquine, the word used most often is stupid, if you look at both Democrats and independents. Let's see, can you see this? Make it a bit bigger. See, the word lies is quite prominent amongst Democrats. They've just used this technique of making words that are used more frequently bigger, so you can see which words are very popular. So for independents, they're using the word lies, stupid, idiot, surprised, irresponsible. And there's some positive words in there as well. There's good, that's used much more infrequently. Shocked, surprising. That's because independents are just newly waking up to the idea that the president is an irresponsible idiot. Democrats have been a bit more receptive to that idea for a while. And when you're more receptive, when you have more neural notches, you have more of a narrative to hook information onto, that makes you more engaged with negative information, more likely to be in a social context that shares information about how stupid, irresponsible, reckless, and destructive the president is. But now independents are finding that evidence too incontrovertible to challenge, and they are shocked and surprised. Other words in the independent section, so this is what interests me most, independents changing their mind, is crazy, fool, unproven, dangerous, reckless. Great. And even amongst Republicans, I can still see the word stupid with a red block around it. Surprised. They use the word choice, like, well, it's his choice, I guess. And good. They're like, good, great, good for you, Trump, taking hydroxychloroquine. We are brainwashed, and we think that whatever you say is gold. Yes, Trump asked if he should be taking insulin. He likes being reckless because then the news cycle will treat it as a gaffe and talk about it. And that puts him in control of what the news cycle talk about. And he gains an advantage from people in the media talking about how stupid he is, because Trump has a big electoral advantage with people who are sensitive to being called stupid. A lot of Trump voters are people who have a chip on their shoulder that they don't have a college degree. So Trump sometimes purposefully, I'm sure, indulges in stupid behaviors in order to create media reports on how stupid he is or how stupid his behavior has been, which he knows will help exacerbate the malicious and excitable, defensive, and gleeful statements on the part of his reporter. The more the media calls him stupid, the more people that hate the media will say, ha, ha, ha. And they didn't expect him to win, did they? They think he's stupid and that he's not all big syllable words like those other pompous female wordy Democrats, wordy, wonky, policy interested Democrats who believe in science. He's a man of the people. Doesn't matter if you call him stupid. He's got a good gut instinct and he does the right thing. He's the genius that brought us hydroxychloroquine. He's the genius that brought us a strong economy, even though he rode on Obama's coattails and then exposed the country to hundreds of thousands of deaths when he needed to kiss up to China and hide his manufacturing recession with a Chinese trade deal in January. So, yes, lots of people know that Trump's stupid. Lots of people know that his education isn't very important to him. And lots of people in America feel that you don't need an education to get ahead, and that Americans have overvalued, or the American elite has overvalued education. So a lot of Trumpism is a backlash to the system of meritocracy, that implication that if you get a college degree, you deserve a high income and that you are morally better than other people. Of course, if you're college educated, you're slightly less likely to be racist than other people as well. So non-college educated people feel resentful that they are accused of being ignorant and racist, even when they are racist. They may not be ignorant. They may have intelligence in another area other than academia. They may have very intelligent practical skills. They may have a very intelligent understanding of how machines work or how to repair things. They may be very good at being responsible or doing physical labor. There's lots of areas to be successful at other than academic pursuits. But America has been so successful with academia, Nobel Prizes, etc., that no wonder a self-concept arose of, we're Americans, we have good colleges, and we're proud of it. But there were people left out of that who felt put down, who felt some inherent shaming happening. And I urge people to read a bit in The Atlantic by someone called Tom Nichols, who's from a working class background and who has lots of friends and family members who still support Trump. And he struggles to understand it because he can see through. Once you've opened a crack of seeing Trump as bad and you don't make excuses for him and you don't hook your identity around the concept of your support for him, once you don't say, yes, I'm a Trump voter, so don't dare tell me that he's endangered America, because then you're implying that I endangered America through my vote. And I'm not going to countenance any of those arguments. No, siree. So Tom Nichols wrote an article called, I think, The Unmanliest President. And Trump got really upset about that and singled The Atlantic out as a publication and said it was failing and terrible. The things he says when he needs to tell his supporters, don't listen to that, don't read that paper. If anybody recommends it to you, tell them, no, The Atlantic's failing and you're a bunch of weaklings. He's just trying to conserve his base and, I guess, potentially just emotionally indulge himself as well. But I think it's self-preservational in the same way as he attacks Joe Scarborough, to try and encourage his supporters to dismiss what Joe says, to dismiss the article in Atlantic, because he knows it's an area of vulnerability, that some of the irrational attachment to Trumpism and to Trump derives from men who think that Trump is the champion of masculinity, that it's feminists and academics who've brought us the term toxic masculinity, and then in order to defend men's status and privilege and have people be grateful enough to men who make the effort to provide for families, who make the effort to commit labor to the good of the community. Feminism and academia can sometimes sound quite unappreciative and quite toxic towards men. And it's difficult to quantify. It's difficult to talk about, oh yes, we've measured it and men have lost 5 units of public sympathy. But it has happened. There has been a loss. And next time I talk, we'll go over an article, a research paper conducted by a female liberal professor whose job is understanding race relations. And she gave groups of people a class on white privilege and found that when they were retested, so tested prior to the class and tested afterwards, that conservatives didn't change in their attitudes towards poor people of color. They were still unsympathetic to them, and they were still unsympathetic to poor white people. They were just generally unsympathetic and also racist. But more progressive people, having had a specific class saying, look at white privilege, it helps people, they were less sympathetic to poor white people. So there was measurable units of sympathy lost on this, the way their feelings were graphed and surveyed and then quantified. That they were still sympathetic for poor black people. They were already progressive, so they were already like, yep, we understand. If you're poor and black, there have been some societal factors that have helped entrench poverty for people in your community and for people of a similar background to you. But for white poor people, they were more like, nap, and you've got no excuse. Collectively speaking, the people studied became less sympathetic and more dismissive of the concerns of people who are poor and white. So there is some rationality underpinning the irrational and destructive rationalizations and thoughts of Trump supporters. And I feel more powerful when I can approach that in a sympathetic way that doesn't veer into indulgence, that doesn't say, oh, yes, you should have what you want. You should get to keep Trump as a president. He's marvelous. No, he's not marvelous. They were wrong. And even though they think that it will benefit them for Trump being in power because he loves them, they think he loves them and it's a mutual adoration. It's not, and he'll cheerfully throw everybody under the bus in order to keep himself out of prison and to give himself continuing access to the Treasury of the United States. Yes, it's true that the doctor's letter reporting on Trump taking hydroxychloroquine just said that discussions had been had about the relative risks and benefits of Trump taking hydroxychloroquine, very carefully worded to not commit to whether or not Trump had been prescribed the drug, and indeed not admit whether or not Trump was actually taking the drug. That's nice. So a majority of people are still more concerned with the novel coronavirus's impact on public health than on the economy. I have heard that. And the key piece of understanding that demonstrates is that Americans understand that the economy is a function of public health. If you don't have public health, if you put public health in jeopardy over and over again, if you squander the time given to you by public adherence to social distancing measures, and instead twiddle your fingers and yell at governors and still do nothing to invoke the Defense Production Act, they understand that you are jeopardizing the economy, that it is more difficult to have people go out and spend money when they still feel unsafe, and that in large part they still feel unsafe because the federal government, the Trump administration, is not taking adequate steps to protect people. That Jared Kushner is put in charge of things and that he gives contracts to his friends. If you know Jared Kushner, if you know someone who knows Jared Kushner, you can place a call, send an email to a special hotline email address, and you might get a supply of protective personal equipment delivered to your preferred hospital. But it's not a system that benefits and supports America as a whole. And that Trump's method of ruling for favoritism, doing favors for Republican senators whose seats are in jeopardy, is not conducive to America's strength as a whole, to American public health overall. So there's enough independents who understand that and enough Republicans who are even beginning to question Trump's methods. And it's not just an absence of methods, because he's purposely sabotaging other people's efforts to respond to the virus. He's purposefully sabotaging health officials by undermining mask wearing as a response to the virus. He refuses to wear refuses to wear a mask. He seems to encourage the wearing of a virus. But I'll just say again, that I'm going to go and play music for my brother and then get off the internet. I need to play it from something with a better speaker than my phone. It's a bit tinny on my phone. I'm glad you liked it, Alan. Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, Euromaestro. There's about 30 seconds of music left, so don't feel in a rush. Oh no, that was the end. I'm glad you enjoy it. I will let my brother know. Maybe next time I'll play the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 that he recorded. Take care, everybody. Bye. Bye. Thanks, Perry Pilot. Glad you enjoyed it. Bye, Bob. Bye, Sheldon. Bye, Alan. Bye, Euromaestro. And get in touch with me, Euromaestro, if you want to get involved. You can direct message me now. I've followed you on Twitter, so let me know if you'd like to join me for a chat. Take care. Bye.